Again last night when they thought it would be a landslide victory for a hater of Jews and a hater of Israel. This guy hates Jews. Somebody said, oh, that's a little strong. No, he hates Jews and he hates Israel. Abdul el-Sayed. Do you believe this? This could only happen to me. Abdul el-Sayed, lovely gentleman. He's a man of hate. And now he's going around saying, no, I love everybody. He doesn't love everybody. Put him in office. You're going to find out what he loves. He doesn't love Israel. He doesn't love Jewish people. He hates them. He hates them with a passion that burns in his heart, and there's not a frickin' thing he can do about it. But he's going to lose to our great candidate. We have a great candidate in Michigan. Abdul, he's full of shit. They want it to be a communist country. We're not letting them have it as a communist country, not even for a minute.
Yeah. And this is so deep, Carl, the way that Donald Trump is attacking him.
So divisive. It takes me back to what Larry was just talking about with regard to 1854. You could just substitute slavery and you'd have much of the same argument. But a bigger issue here, for me anyway, as a erstwhile professor who taught all this crap, and I don't say that derisively, just to give it a good name, is what the transformation of Donald Trump. If you think about the 2016, 2017 first term Donald Trump, and then you think about the campaigning Donald Trump for the second term and the inauguration and afterwards, you saw a guy who was trying to convince the American people, or at least enough of them to get elected again, the first time and the second time, who was talking about reducing America's commitments in the world, condemning wars like Biden and Bush had gone through, George W. He was a Trump you could identify with as more or less, in that regard, a typical Republican, along the lines of the ones who didn't want to enter NATO. Fought Harry Truman to death and Dean Acheson too to keep us from being a member of NATO, and came very close to derailing the whole process. Almost so close that I think they gave Harry Truman and Acheson in particular some real heartburn at the time, and Dwight Eisenhower and others too. You still have that in the Republican Party. And that's what Trump kind of looked like he was trying to creep towards as he did his first term, and then as he campaigned for and entered and made his speeches around the inauguration in his second term. Look at what's happened to him. He's a warmongering son of a bitch now. He's a horrible president in that regard. He talks about using the armed forces of the United States, and this is his language, to torture people. He has no compunction about attacking schools and hospitals and water facilities and power plants and other things. Absolute transformation. All to say, Donald Trump is a comedian of character. He has no character. And that's what's plaguing us right now. There is no character in this administration, but certainly not in its head man, Donald Trump. And no one plays to that lack of character better than Pete Hegseth, which, as Larry intimated, has gotten him into trouble a little bit now, apparently, because playing to Trump's character is playing to fire and brimstone. And you can't be a sycophant and play to that very well for very long. I'm surprised he's lasted as long as he has. But just to sum up, I think we're in real, as Larry said, 1854-like trouble. And we're in that trouble principally because of Donald Trump. So if the Congress has got any sense at all, if it recovers its senses, it will impeach him and remove him from office.
Laurie, do you see the process of what's going on inside the United States and outside would put some sort of, limits on the way that the United States is supporting Israel? Because the way that the Israeli sort of occupation in Lebanon, I would say, in Gaza, and the attack on Iran, if they decide to attack Iran, in my opinion, if they do something in Dahiya, in Beirut, Iran going to react, and we're going to get back to the war. And how is that going to be avoidable, considering the United States and the leverage the United States has on Israel?
Sort of the situation you'd be in if, so you're in college, your parents gave you a credit card, told you, hey, spend whatever you want. Man, you turn out to be, you're out buying yourself a Lamborghini and going to bars every night. And, you're spending money like a drunken sailor. And then your parents send you a note and say, hey, we're bankrupt. You got to get the credit card back. That's the situation Israel is in now with the United States. In the past, they thought they had basically Uncle Sam's limitless checkbook, and we'd have their back. Well, now we can't even have their back with air defense systems, apart from the fact that those air defense systems are crappy and don't work. But at least we could provide the illusion of that. And as Colonel Wilkerson noted with respect to the EUCOM chief, the U.S. commander for Europe, when he said shut down. Hey, I guess he's over the 6th Fleet, right? And he said, hey, can't use my destroyers. We don't have I don't have enough to protect the folks I'm supposed to protect, and we're certainly not going to go use them for Israel's behalf. That was the message, and so the United States has weakened itself militarily, weakened itself economically. I mean, I can't emphasize enough that it's not getting the attention. But since Donald Trump has taken office 18 months ago, he's added $3 trillion to the national debt. We've gone from 37 trillion to we're just shy of $40 trillion. This is unbelievable. And yet everybody's like, oh, no big deal. No, you can't. Like I said, you can keep spending on those credit cards, but sometimes it's got to be, you got to make payment. And when you can't make payment, then the problems begin.
And this is all being managed, by the way, Nima, by a guy who can't even explain in a way that makes sense a trade deficit. Scott Bessent.
Yeah.
Colonel, what would be your advice for Donald Trump if you were supposed to talk with him directly? I assume that you would talk about the military aspect with the case of the economy, but after all, you have to mostly focus on the complexity of the region and how this war has changed the face of the West Asia, in my opinion. And how is that gonna be helpful for Donald Trump and the vision he has on the region?
Well, he would never listen. At least I don't expect him to. Wouldn't expect him to. But if I were the chairman or the Secretary of Defense, even more to your question, because that's the person who ought to be doing this, I would tell him he had several choices. One, keep on the path he's on and destroy himself and part of the country and certainly part of the military. Two, and I'd recommend against that, of course. Two, to come to some modus vivendi with his principal enemy, Iran, and make it look like a victory any way he could, to include his lying mouth, and see if he could make that work and tell Bibi Netanyahu what he was doing, and he would shut him down if he had to, completely shut him down in terms of the relationship. Three, I would say the best thing you can do, though, the very best thing you can do, is announce all this publicly and make it look like you really do have a policy and a strategy to implement that policy, and make it look like you are in control of both. And that means you have to demonstrate to the American people and to the world, and most importantly, too, to the Israelis, that you will not be their lickspittle anymore. And that means cracking down on them big time. Well, what does that mean? It means you're not going to support them at all in their effort to continue operations in Lebanon, to continue operations in Gaza, to continue operations in the West Bank, to look jealously upon Syria and Jordan, and so forth. You would crack down. much the way H.W. Bush did when he had the leeway to do so after the first Gulf War. He really had a lot of coin in his pocketbook at that point, which is why he did it, which is why he cracked down on them big time, as he cracked down on them more than any president since Eisenhower. And that's what got him unelected. But Trump's not going to do any of that. Not going to do any of that because he doesn't have the character, the capability, the brain power, and he's disinclined to do anything that might be positive in a long-term sense, and to do everything that he thinks gains an audience for 5 minutes. Just look at his post.
Larry, I assume, since Reagan coming to the present time, Donald Trump, you see some sort of reduction in the leverage or in the way that the United States wants to put pressure on Israel. You don't see, even with the Biden administration, we saw what was happening in Gaza. The Biden administration totally supported the total destruction of Gaza. They sent a lot of bombs, everything. Even Antony Blinken went there to Israel. He said, he didn't say that he's the Secretary of State. He said, I'm a Jew here, and it means that I have another connection with you. It doesn't include necessarily the United States. And when it comes to the Trump administration, it's getting worse. The Trump is just giving everything to Benjamin Netanyahu. He's just sacrificing everything. One of the things that we've started this talk today, it was the new pact between, among these three important countries in the West Asia: Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey. This is the outcome of what has happened. This is a little thing. You look at it on the paper, but it means that they have legitimate concerns about what's going on with the United States presence in that region. How is that going to be translated in the mind of those decision makers in Washington as they see the Israeli sort of leverage on the establishment is growing somehow, and they're not doing anything about it?
Well, you think the Israeli leverage over the Washington establishment is growing? Yeah, I would say no. I think it's just the opposite. I think they've had their high water mark. They've now reached a level where the alienation and the split that I talked about earlier within the Republican Party is starting, and it's not just in the Republican Party, because it's also within the Democrat Party, as Colonel Wilkerson correctly noted. Trump has plenty of leverage over Israel. He's just chosen not to use it, and that's the critical issue. Now, will there come a moment in which he would potentially cut Israel loose? Yeah, Trump is not some sort of principled guy that, even though he right now acts and thinks like a committed Zionist, that if it comes down to his own survival or Israel's, he'll toss them overboard in a heartbeat. And that's coupled with the fact that the United States doesn't have much to give. We can't give Israel air defense systems. Remember, or maybe you don't remember, and maybe most of the people watching or listening didn't get this stat. But during the war that started on 28 February and continued until about April 5th, April 15th, the United 2/3 of the air defense systems that were employed were the U.S. systems, not David Sling, not Iron Dome, but PAC-3 on the Patriot and THAAD. And they didn't do a very effective job. And now we don't have any more to give. And so Israel's they've actually got to tread carefully, because if things get provoked again and Iran starts lobbing missiles at them, they won't be able to stop them. So that's why I say this is a moment where I think Israel has finally overreached. Now, it's not to say that, yes, they still exercise control over a number of legislators, but as we saw with those congressional elections, primaries up in New York City, there were at least 3 ardent Zionist Democrats that got ousted and replaced by anti-Zionist people. So that's why I say the world is starting to turn on Israel, and their influence is receding. It's not increasing.
Carl, what do you make of it?
I agree with Larry. I think there's a lot of danger left. Listened to the two interviews yesterday with Fetterman from Pennsylvania, and it wasn't as inarticulate on the part of the senator as Tucker Carlson's with Ted Cruz, but it amounted to the same thing. Israel first, Israel second, Israel third. I could not possibly abandon Israel. And you just have to wonder about people like that. Have they ever read any history? Have they ever studied their own history in terms of Washington's comments, which are very acute, very, very studied about putting your, eggs in another country's basket? He was talking about Citizen Genet and France, Napoleonic to be France and such, and the war between France and Britain. That's minuscule to the kind of I'm not taking anything away from Washington, but it's minuscule in terms of how we're buried in Israel right now, especially in the legislature and other places that count. I think Larry's right. I think that's breaking up. And with the American people, I think if someone just, I won't say exploited, but I will say exploited it properly and politically, that we could make hay out of that, and we could divorce ourselves from this monstrously dangerous state in the eastern end of the Mediterranean that still has nuclear weapons, and worries me in that regard, particularly if Bibi is still in there in charge when the existential moment really shows itself, both for him personally and for Israel as a state. We need to get that to happen, and we need it to happen quicker rather than later. I know it's happening slowly. That's the way our system works, but it needs to happen faster, and it particularly needs to happen with influential people in the Congress, particularly in the Senate.